How often have you heard a message that you've been called by God? I think you've all heard a message that you've been called by God, haven't you? Yes. I think we all have. Exactly, and it's absolutely correct, isn't it? But who has the greatest call of all? Yeshua, doesn't he? Yeah. To bring redemption to the world through his blood, through his sacrifice on the cross. That's the message, and that's the call of the Almighty, isn't it? To bring redemption to the world, and also to bring restoration to the nation of Israel, and to establish all the things that the prophets talked about. And it's an amazing call. And it's a call which looks forward to the future all the time, doesn't it? Everything the prophet said have either been fulfilled or are going to be fulfilled in the future. The Bible is full of wonderful callings and wonderful stories of what's going to happen and how God is going to redeem the world that he created in 7 days or 6 days. That's a John. I can't count, John. That's all it is. I do believe it, John. That's just, I can't count. But how many of you are frightened and anxious of the future? A little bit, yeah. I think. Yeah. What about frightened for your children or your grandchildren? Yeah. Most of us have got concerns, haven't we, about what the future holds. And when we look back in Scripture, we look at those great men of God, those men who were called for different things, and how they worried about the future as well, and some of the concerns that David had, and some of the concerns that the prophets had, and the concerns that they gave to the people about their future, because most of the prophets had a message of warning, hadn't they, of doom and disaster, and if they didn't obey God, it was like that was about the future. If you don't obey God, look at Deuteronomy 28, amazing. You know, if you keep the laws of God, it's great, but if you don't, then you're going to be in for a rough ride. But I think we're all concerned now, not about our walk with God so much, but about the future in the nations and how the world is going and how things are changing, and we're all concerned about that. And when we look at the call of Abraham, we see that God was also concerned, because he called Abraham to take a message out to the nations, to be the father of a people who would do that. And Noah, what about his call? An amazing call to build an ark, but they were both different. Genesis 6:9-10 says, "These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God." You could spend your day wondering what it was like, can't you? Just like he walked with God. And then if we move on to Genesis 17:1, it says, "When Abraham was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, 'I am the Almighty. Walk before me.'" It was a different call. Noah walked with God. But God said to Abraham, "Go before me. Walk before me." And the difference in the calling is striking, in the sense that the call for Abraham was a call to pioneer, to do something, to not to be with, but actually to step out, to make a difference in the world. What Noah did, he was part of the salvation story of mankind, wasn't he? Yeah. That's what his call was. But actually with Abraham, it was to make a difference, to tell a story that would make a difference. And actually Abraham's seed, Yeshua, brings about a huge difference, in the sense that when he is sacrificed, when he gives his life and his blood, sheds his blood, he makes a difference to the nations, because now the nations have the salvation that was once given to the Jewish people. And this call of pioneering is really important, because God told Abraham exactly where to go. He told him what his steps should be. And it wasn't easy for Abraham, was it? Because he had to walk all the way up the Euphrates. all the way up to the north. He crossed over to the Mediterranean Sea to Hamath, and then he walked down the coast to Egypt. A big walk. And you know, Glennis and Pete are going to Israel, but they're going to be taken round in a minibus. But when Abraham was told to go, it was on foot. And he took his family and everybody with him. It was a massive, massive call. But he walked in the path that God had told him to walk in, because God trusted him and he trusted God. He had faith to know what to do. And walking in and pioneering is not easy. Whatever you think of somebody who does something for God and moves out, usually you'll find they've gone through difficult times to actually take the first step. And if you read Psalm 23, it says, even though I walk through the darkest valley, it's difficult. You've got to go through some places that you don't want to go. You've got to do things that actually you don't want to do. We've done things in the congregation here, you know, in the past that we didn't want to do. And many of you will remember it when we were called to McCumpleth. We didn't want to go there every month. 2-hour drive every month to pray. We didn't want to go. But we went, and everybody went wholeheartedly when we were called to go and pray on Mulvalley, the mountain over there, every month. It was cold. I remember me and Judith were the only two one month. I don't know whether, I can't remember whether it was January or February, but nobody came with us, did they? And it was really cold. We didn't want to go. But you know when you're called by God, and you know that if God called you, that the purpose is going to be fulfilled. And if he doesn't, if you don't go, he'll call someone else to do it. And if you know it's him with all your heart and soul, you're going to do it, aren't you? And that's what Abraham did. He did it with all his heart and with all his soul. But it takes faith, doesn't it? When God called you, it takes absolute faith. Because you can't see God, can you? He hasn't got a phone number you can ring him. He's got no email, has he? He's got like, you know, you just get a feeling, and we all hear and see God in different ways, don't we? We all have different ways of communicating, or for God communicating with us and us communicating with him. It's different for all of us, and you have to know it's God, and it takes faith. And Abraham had faith, didn't he? If we look at Genesis 15, 5-6, it says, he brought him outside and said to Abraham, look towards heaven and count the stars. If you were able to count them, then he said to him, so shall your descendants be. If God says something to you in our in our time, in our community, or just as an individual, or to you as a family or as a congregation, usually it's within to some extent within our understanding and capabilities. But when God told Abraham this, he said, look to heaven and count the stars. Can you count the stars? But he said, your descendants are going to be that many. It was beyond Abraham's understanding, wasn't it? How would he imagine that would take place? But he had the faith to go with it, didn't he? That something that was impossible was possible with God. And Abraham knew that. He knew that. Exactly. Genesis 22, 1-3 says, God tested Abraham. Because God does test you. I have people saying to me, no, God doesn't test you, but he does. He does test you. He tests your resolve, your faith. You know, when he calls you to do something, he knows you can. He's not calling you to do something that you can't do. So he's going to test you. And he's tested me a number of times. How many of you have actually been tested? Yeah. So God does test you, doesn't he? You know. And he said, where are we? And God tested him, and he said to Abraham, here I am. And then he said to Abraham, take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on the mountains that I shall show you. So Abraham gets up in the morning and prepares Isaac as a sacrifice. Come on. I tell you, I know, I'm pretty sure I couldn't do it. I couldn't. No, but I'm pretty sure, Jill, it's beyond. But if you're so close to God like Abraham was, then it's a possibility. And I want to get that close to God. I just want to get that close to God. But at this moment, I don't think I could do it. Sorry?
Look out, Sam.
Yeah. He's too big, actually, to throw over a donkey now. He's bigger than me. I gave up the other day. I said to him that I got it about a month ago, I've got to give him a good hiding before he gets too tall. And then we stood side by side the other morning, and Shirley said he's got it. He's clinched you. So I missed it. I can't throw him over a donkey and sacrifice him, and neither can I beat him up. Now I've lost the plot. But the writer of Hebrews understands this level of faith, because he says in Hebrews 11, 3-12, by faith we understand that the worlds were prepared by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible. By faith we understand that. By faith I understand creation. It's too technical for me. It's not for maybe John and others, but it is for me. By faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain's. Through this, he received approval as righteous, God himself giving approval to his gifts. He died, but through his faith, he still speaks. By faith, Enoch was taken so that he did not experience death, and he was not found, because God had taken him. For it was attested before he was taken away that he had pleased God. Verse 6, and without faith it is impossible to please God. For whoever would approach him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who seek him. By faith Noah warned by God about events as yet unseen. Because God warns us about things that are yet to be seen, doesn't he? And then I'll let you read the rest of that chapter. Romans 4:9-12 says, does this blessedness then come upon the circumcised only, or upon the uncircumcised also? For we say that faith was accounted to Abraham for righteousness. How then was it accounted? While he was circumcised or uncircumcised? Not while uncircumcised, but not while circumcised, but while uncircumcised. So that's before God made the covenant with Abraham. He called Abraham and gave him the call to go and pioneer a nation. That's what the call was. And that was before the covenant was actually given in its fullness. And Abraham had the faith to go out and do it. And pioneering anything is by faith, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, but you have to step out. You have to walk the call. Don't you? So if God called you, have to walk. You have to step out. You can't sit down and do nothing, because that's not faith. If you sit down, if God says go and do this, and you don't, is that faith? No. It's faithless. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And faith has to be followed through with action. It has to be. It's God's purpose for us to be fulfilled, but we have to get out of our chairs and do it. We have to work. We have to do something positive. Look at Moses. He didn't want to do it, did he? His call. But he was a pioneer. He left one land with a group of people to another land, a desert, and God gave him instructions to give those people. He pioneered Judaism, if you like. He pioneered the Torah for God. It was God's plan, and God would have called somebody else if he hadn't have done it. But he pioneered the first 5 books of the Bible through Moses, a pioneer. He had a pioneer spirit, didn't he? He wanted to go and do something for God. He wanted to do something new for God. Although there's nothing new for God, is there? But it is for us. The things that God called us to do may have been done 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But actually for us, it's new in our generation, in our lifetime, isn't it? And then Joshua, the things Joshua did, the call that God, Joshua had, was to go into the land and take the land for the people of Israel. It was a pioneering task, wasn't it? It was a call to go out and pioneer. That's what it was. And if we look at in recent times, men of God have been called by God to pioneer something that in terms of our minds are impossible. I'm going to talk just for a few seconds about Wingert, who was born in 1903 in India. His parents were Plymouth Brethren missionaries in India. And in 1937, Wingert was commissioned to go to Israel. Now, 1937 is 2 years before the Holocaust, isn't it? And it's after the Balfour Declaration, but it's before the Day of Independence in 1948, clearly. And Wingert is in that period of time. And he starts to read on his way to Israel some of the things that the Zionists are talking about, Christian Zionists, and also Herzl and those guys, and political Zionists such as Balfour. And by the time he arrives in Israel, he's convinced 100% that God has called him to help the Zionist movement establish the nation of Israel. Amen. Absolutely 100%. And by the time by 1938, just 12 months after his arrival in Israel, he's called to establish special night squads, which were just little units of men who I'll tell you, there was 80 men altogether and 30 of his own staff who joined together and made little squads, night squads, to go out and take out the Arabs who were murdering Jews like they are today. You know, like Arabs now are going into Jerusalem in these lone wolf attacks, and they're attacking Jews on the streets, etc. We call them lone wolf attacks now, but actually they're not, because they're being incited by Arab leaders. It's a planned thing, this thing is. Absolutely planned. Well, in Wingert's time, he took little units out at night to destroy those Arab terror cells, if you like, in order to do that. And Wingert fought back at Arabs and taught the Jews of the time how to combat in terrorist situations. Such was his belief. But you know what? He took a load of stick for that. He took a mammoth amount of stick for that, because he was a Christian, he was a British officer, and yet he was even encouraging the Jews to commit crimes because they weren't allowed to hold arms. And he was getting weapons for them to fight. But he knew the call that God had got on his life. He knew it. And he gave his reputation, his commission and everything else to see the call that God had put on him fulfilled, and to see the nation of Israel established. Amen. And there were other people just like Wingert, probably not as clandestine, if you like, as Wingert, but they were like him, men of God who knew they were called to establish the nation of Israel. And they gave up everything to do that, to see that happen. And God was more important to them than anything at all. And that's something we've got to learn. What's more important to us than God? Nothing is more important to us, is it? Whatever it is, it's not as important as God. God has to be first, because he knows the end plan, doesn't he? Paul was a pioneer, wasn't he? He was bringing the Torah to the Gentiles. It's exactly what he did. I was last weekend, all through last weekend, for 12 hours on Saturday, 12 hours on Sunday, and all the way up to 11 o'clock on Monday night. I was arguing that point in different ways with different people. Right up on a Monday night, still at 11 o'clock at night. Tuesday morning, I meet a pastor, and I have lunch with him, and I spend 5 hours arguing the same thing again. Because the truth of it is that Paul was just a continuation of the pioneers of Israel who went out to the nations to tell the nations how to live and who to pray to. Not to pray to Allah or these other gods. I mean, Allah was there then, but he hadn't been formalized in the form of Islam. But he's not God. And that message had to go out. Those things that they were praying to in the Roman Empire, Zeus and Jupiter and Diana, they are not gods at all, as Paul says. So the message has to go out. But you have to pioneer, because you have to go into an area of paganism, don't you, to teach that. And that's what Paul's call was. Jeremiah had a similar call. Jeremiah 1:4-5 says, "Now the word of the Lord came to me, saying, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you to be a prophet to the nations." That's what Jeremiah's call was, and that's what Paul's call was, to go out to the nations and to teach. What are we to do? We're to take the gospel to the nations, aren't we? That's what our call is. Go out, heal the sick, raise the dead, cast out demons, preach the gospel. So what's the gospel? It's saying simply that if you break the Torah, under circumstances without Yeshua, you're doomed for hell. An eternity in hell. But what's the gospel? When he shed his blood, that sacrifice redeems us from the penalty of sin. So that's what we're called to do. And it's not something that's an impartial message. We have today in Christendom ministers who are saying that we should get in bed with Islam and with all sorts of other faiths. Hinduism, Buddhism. Buddhism is something that is actually creeping into the church today. And it's impartiality. And what is being said in regard to Israel in the church is, I'm impartial. I don't really go for what the Palestinians are doing, and neither do I go for what the Jews are doing. How many of you have heard that argument? Because that's a common argument, isn't it? But you know what? Impartiality accepts the idea that truth and lies are the same. That's what it does. And when you're pioneering, you can't say that good and bad is the same. When you're pioneering in terms of God's pioneering, you have to say that things are wrong. And you have to make decisions. You have to make a call. You have to say things that actually are going to upset people. And they are. And nobody wants to. I don't want to upset anybody. I tell you, in the police force, I upset loads of people. Ed in the prison service, you upset everybody every day, don't you? But you don't want to do it, you know. We don't want to do it. And in pioneering something like we're doing here, you're going to upset people. Absolutely. And I don't want to be that impartial type of person that actually says that good and bad are the same. I don't want to do that. That good and bad are equal. That godliness is the same as ungodliness, which is the period of time that we seem to be entering in the church today. We see things that are ungodly, and we call them godly. I don't want to preach about that too long, but we have to give a clear message. We can't be afraid to give a clear message. We mustn't be impartial. We can't do that. We can't please everybody. We just have to please God. We have to please him with decisions we make every day. We have to be God pleasers. I'm speaking next week in the Christian Party National Conference in Birmingham. Those guys who started the Christian Party are not impartial at all. They're sticking their necks out and saying it as it is in a political arena. I'm not called to a political arena, but the guys like Jeff Green and others who are in that Christian Party are not worried about their reputation. They're worried about pleasing God. And that is a pioneering movement in society today, which I think we've got to pray for, we've got to hold up, and we've got to honour, because society and our government is in a mess. I was sad to read this morning that Jeremy Corbyn, who is the leader of the Labour Party, a party that is for the Trident missile, right, because at the conference just a couple of weeks ago, said they supported the Trident missile. Jeremy Corbyn leads that party. He's just become the vice president of CND, which is against the Trident missile. What is that about? That's the future. That's trying to keep everybody happy. That's impartiality. But aren't politicians supposed to be pioneers in the political realm? Aren't they supposed to be there for the truth and justice? Gone are the politicians of old. We've got a set of politicians today who please each other and please themselves. And that's really sad, you know. Really sad. At its core, the Torah, the books that God gave us, and the prophets, and what Yeshua says about those, bring us political and economic freedoms. That's what they're there for. Now I want you to think about that. They bring us freedoms in the Torah with regard to debt, with regard to justice, etc., that our politicians will not give us. And once we get a grip of that, we'll start to read the first five books of the Bible with a passion, with an absolute passion, because they're things that God gives us to free us from the things that man puts before us. Pioneering has to be led by those who are not man pleasers but God pleasers. They have to be, otherwise nothing gets pioneered, guys. Nothing at all. Nothing will happen unless you've got people right in the front who are black or white in some ways. You have to be. You know that. You know that. You have to give a clear message and sound a clear message. And while I've been praying this last week, I've really felt that God has been speaking to me about this issue in Israel. And I'm going to just mention the Second World War. When you look at the Second World War and the years that preceded it, the people of Europe were taught by the church and the state that the Jews were a danger to society. They were a danger to the quality of life, their standard of living. They were a danger to the political regime. They were a danger to communities, because they might even steal your child if you're Christian and drink its blood on Passover. Because that was still taught prior to the Holocaust. So they're taught they're a danger. And I felt the Lord saying to me that we're coming to a time now where the message is going to be given out that Israel is going to be a danger to world peace. That's very, very close, I think. And what will that do in the minds of people in, let's say, the UK where we live? Israel will become a pariah state, like the Jew was a pariah in Holocaust. And unless you're strong on Scripture, and you're pioneering for God, for Israel, then you're going to stumble at that, because we all want world peace. And our hearts will then start to rule us, and we want to please those who would speak about world peace as opposed to those who would follow God. And you're going to make a call. And I'm already seeing a call now where people were called to support Israel, but now are supporting other things that don't have a reference with Israel. Because they don't want to defend Israel anymore. Because of the lies that it put out against Israel. And we're walking down this road now where Israel is going to be demonized even further, but seen as a danger to Europe and a danger to the United States. And we're going to have to stand firm. And we're going to have to stick with the pioneering path that God has given us to stand with Israel and to make her jealous. That's what we're going to have to stick to. And even further, when we go down that path, we're going to have to stick with things like the Sabbath and the festivals. They're a delight, aren't they, to do that? But I tell you, when Israel becomes such a demonized state and is seen as a demonized state, anybody like us is going to be put in the same basket. Now, I asked you, are you frightened of the future and what the future is? I started to look again a little bit of what is the new thing in terms of surveillance and targeting of criminals today. And targeting of terrorists, because that really interests me. Targeting of terrorists. How do our authorities target terrorists today? It's really important because we are seeing that the world's population, the movement of the population of the world is already happening. And if you look at, say, Sweden, for example, in just 10 to 15 years, Sweden will have a change in population where immigrants will be more in number than the actual Swedish government, Swedish people. And there'll be a big change. And that's happening in other parts of Europe as well. And it's clear that that is the intention of many within Islam, is to change the population. I mean, they're trying to do it in Israel with regard to having children, more Arab children than Israeli children, etc., etc. That is already on the cards here, and you know that is in the UK. But if you imagine, there's could be a huge change in population. And how do our security services keep an eye on what's going on with terrorists? Because if terrorists actually come and make themselves out to be decent people within the community, which is what they do, then how do you detect them? So I started looking at what the governments are doing today. And when I was doing surveillance, it was pretty simple, really. We didn't have GPS. We didn't have those things. We did a little bit with mobile phones, but really, our surveillance capabilities and our intelligence gathering was really with landline phones, not mobile phones. So what is happening today? Well, let me tell you a little bit about it. The National Security Agency in America are funded in excess of $10 billion a year. Not million, $1 billion a year. And they give out directions to our GCHQ, British GCHQ, on surveillance, on actions with regard to terrorism, with regard to movements of population, etc. And our GCHQ then give directions to MI5 and MI6, and then they give directions to the police. And we kind of think of this surveillance and use of technology in a very naive way today. Because how many of you think that your emails are not registered? And your mobile phone? Yeah. Our system of checking mobile phones years ago would be, if you went and you use your mobile phone, it would come up on an aerial which would go to the server, and that's how you would trace where you were, or you put your credit card into the hole in the wall at Tesco's, and if we could get hold of your bank accounts, we knew you'd been to Tesco's in Mold or Birkenhead, etc. And you could trace somebody for the whole day. They fueled up with petrol in Deeside, and that was easy. But did you know that smartphone hacking by governments is not commonplace. It is done as a matter of course. And there's things called Smurfs are used, which actually can turn on your mobile phone and listen to your conversation. Microphone tapping through your mobile phone for terrorists is commonplace. Now, what I'm saying here is I'm glad that our government are doing something with regard to terrorism. But when we become, and Israel and the Jews become a target, we've got a problem. Hacking tools called remote control systems are used by 21 governments in the world, other than the 5 major governments involved in this. And the 5 major governments are ourselves, France, America, New Zealand, and Australia. G5. But there are 21 other governments that are able to access your emails, and every time you get onto a website, because they take control of your computer without you knowing it. And these are the governments: Azerbaijan, Colombia, Egypt, Ethiopia, Hungary, Italy, Kazakhstan, Korea, Malaysia, Mexico, Morocco, Nigeria, Oman, Panama, Poland, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Thailand, Turkey, United Arab Emirates, and Uzbekistan. Those governments, on top of the main 5, have access to your telephones, your mobile phones, and your computers, and mine as well. Another interesting snooper capability, if you like to call it that, is called PRISM. And the National Security Agency collects every single internet communication that goes out of the UK, or is even created within the UK. But every internet communication that you and I make is collected through this system called PRISM. Every single one. It's a massive database collection system. It's huge. It's beyond your imagination, really. And PRISM also uses access to all the major things like Facebook and Google, all the major internet organizations. And there is no way, whether you use McAfee or Norton or whatever, that you can stop that collection being made. That is being made every single hour of every day, of every week, of every month, of our information through every system, and every time we make a mobile phone call, that is checked. What do you think of that?
Horrifying.
Yeah, horrifying. 2 ways of looking at it. One, it can help us with regard to security. Secondly, there's no point in us saying we need to be secret. I'm not telling you where I'm going or what I'm doing because I don't want anyone to find out. Guys, yeah, Saudi Arabia can turn on your mobile phone, Carol, and listen to what you're saying to Al. Right? Now then. Yeah. You ring Jill on your mobile.
It's a blick.
Okay. So they're safe, they're all right. But it can be a good thing and a bad thing, can't it? The future for Israel looks bleak. It looks bleak. And as a pioneering nation, like Abraham was a pioneer, like Moses was a pioneer, there's nothing they can do to stop their secrets getting out. Nothing at all. And there's nothing that we can do to protect ourselves in the internet age from people who want to know what we're doing. Nothing at all we can do. But I tell you what we can do. I'll tell you what we can do. We can wait and listen to God for Him to tell us how to react at any one given time. There's situations today, and you've heard about it, where people are saying, listen, I've got a safe house for Jews. I'm going to create a safe house for... You know, if you're involved with me at all, your house ain't going to be safe. Because if I was part of the intelligence unit, and I was part of looking at intelligence at Holyhead Port, and that was no small thing, because 2 million people go through Holyhead Port every year. And I was responsible for that for the National Crime Squad. Then if I was looking for you and your associates, I would simply go to your mailbox and find out who you'd mailed, or who you'd phoned, etc., etc. Dead easy. And then if we were going to do a job to find out what you were doing, we'd turn over everybody involved. So maybe 50 or 60 people turned over on one morning. So we're not going to be able to have safe houses in the way that you would imagine, certainly in the Second World War. But what I can tell you is God knows about these plans.
Yeah.
And God actually has a plan. He has. But what he says, and this is important, in Isaiah 63, 3-4, he says this. He says about the people of Israel, when they walked away from him and sinned. He said, I also will choose to mock them and bring upon them what they fear. Because when I called, no one answered. And when I spoke, they did not listen. But they did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and chose to do what did not please me. Now, the key thing for me is, no one answered when I spoke. They did not listen. If we want to be pioneers in this age, we have to listen to God, not listen to men. We have to hear his voice. And his voice is saying, and I'm convinced of this, his voice is saying, get ready to stand with Israel like you've never stood with him before. What are we called to do? We're called to make the Jews jealous. How have we done that in this congregation? By standing with Israel and not asking anything from her, but just being there to support her. And God is saying, listen. So who do we listen to? We listen to him, but how do we listen? Through the prophets. And what the prophets say, he's gathering Israel back to the land. That's what they say. The prophets are saying he's bringing them from every corner of the earth. The prophets are saying the bride must make herself ready. Amen. Where he's restoring the Sabbath to the church like it's never been restored before. When I was in South Wales last week, people were hungry to know what it's about. Pastor came up on Tuesday wanting to know about Sabbath, but asking a lot of questions. The feasts, God's hungry, that people are becoming hungry to know what it's about. And it's all part of the bride making herself ready. There's no room to sin anymore. If we're going to we're going to pioneer a road, not only to do with Israel, but to do with the Torah, no one should be able to call us for what we're doing. We're mature Christians, aren't we? We are mature. Peter, for me, was an amazing pioneer. But he said this, he said in 1 Peter 2:4-6, and I'm finishing now, 2:4-6. Come to him a living stone, though rejected by mortals, yet chosen and precious in God's sight. And like living stone, let yourself be built into a spiritual house, to be a holy priesthood. If we're going to be called to do this work, we have to be a holy priesthood. There is no room for us to follow the flesh. We have to go and follow God. Because he's saying, walk before me. He's trusting us in this. Therefore, walk as a priesthood would walk, in holiness. Don't accept sin in your life, whatever. In 1 Peter 8:5, 8-11, Peter says, discipline yourselves, keep yourselves alert, because something will come in to snatch you. He knows that. Something will come in to break the call that God's got on our lives. Something from the pit of hell will come in to destroy relationships, come in to destroy your faith, come in to destroy the very things that you're called to do. And it'll come in through sin. It will. And that's why Paul said, don't forsake the fellowship, because we check each other out, don't we? We keep each other walking on the straight road. That's why we're desperate for grace to find a church in Huddersfield. Shirley gave us some stick on Thursday. You've got to find one. She is looking. She is joining the Christian Union, but she's got to attend a church, because she'll fall away if she doesn't. And Peter says, discipline yourselves. Keep alert. Like a roaring lion, your adversary, the devil, prowls around. You know, we've got a call in Christendom to stand with Israel, to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, to walk in holiness, to make them jealous of our God. Amen. Who is their God. Yes. And you know, we have to do it with all our heart and all our soul. At the expense of our reputation, the expense of the material things that we desire, and at the expense of it being impartial when it comes to matters of faith. And when I asked you that question, were you scared or frightened? You know, we are frightened of the things that we see, aren't we? Yeah. And have experienced. We can't see God. But I tell you, I know he's there. Yeah. And with him, I'm not frightened at all. Right. I'm not worried about anything at all for my children, my grandchildren. Because God is a God who is faithful to his promises, that if he calls you, he's faithful to answer our prayers. He's faithful to go with us, and he's faithful to protect us in everything that he does. And at the end of the day, if we stay on course, we'll be in eternity with him forever and ever and ever. Father, I want to thank you for this opportunity to share. Lord, I want to thank you that, Lord, that you're a God who cares and a God who calls us and a God who instructs us and counsels us. And Father, you're a God who is faithful to Israel as well. And you're not going to let it down, Lord. So Father, would you have us be a people who will stand firm, continue on this walk of pioneering this work in this nation of ours, that we would be a blessing to you, to the nation of Israel, but also, Father, we would walk in uprightness and righteousness that would shine your light in the communities in which we live. So would you help us now in Yeshua's name? Amen.